I don't think that it was conscious, but as I look back at all of my exploration into everything health and wellness, whether that be food, whether that be mindfulness, whether that be like sobriety, I think in many ways I was using wellness to fix my brokenness. I was using wellness to fix my brokenness. It was just more socially acceptable. But I was still that same girl on the kitchen floor. This time, it just wasn't screaming at her kids or drinking too much wine. It was stressing over how to teach meditation and getting 10,000 steps in. So it just looked different. Hi, welcome back to the show. If you are listening to this, it means that I didn't quit, that we are doing this. I have been wanting to do this podcast for a while, and life has gotten in the way for lots of various reasons. If you don't know me, I've got 4 young kids, and about 2 years ago, we moved from Chicago to California on a whim, which is not how I operate. If you are a mom before, you get it. We do everything very methodically, thought out, well planned. We have plan A's, B's, and C's and D's, and moving to California for our family was on none of those. And yet we did it, and it's taken me 1,000,001 years to get settled. So the podcast has been put on hold. But anyway, here we are. We're doing this. I am so nervous, you guys. I feel like I'm going to cry and want to throw up. But I mean, if you don't feel one of those at one point of your day, what are you even doing with your life? Before we begin, this is going to be an episode about why I'm starting WithIn, why I felt called to do this, a little bit about me so you can get to know me. And I hope one day to be able to get to know all of you and talk about what we're going to do here. Like, what's the point of all this? What in the hell are we doing here? Before I jump into any of that, though, I just want to say I am new at this. Shocker. I know you're all shocked, but I am. I'm brand new at this. Brand spanking new. Today is day 1 for me. It's September 3rd. We had Labor Day over the weekend. My kids all went back to school this morning, and I pulled out this microphone, and here we are sitting down and doing this. So the reason I'm saying that is because this is episode 1. And I am hoping by episode 2, I'm a little bit better, and maybe by 3 or 4. And by episode 100 or 200 and 300, I hope I'm a hell of a lot better. And I'm just going to ask that as I am taking a beginner's mindset at this and knowing that I'm clearly not great at this yet, that will happen, that we'll get there. And I'm just going to encourage you to do that same thing in your own life. Just like I'm starting something new. My kids are up at school doing things new at brand new schools. Maybe we can all just give ourselves a little bit of fucking grace and try some things new. So as I am sitting here being a newbie host at this show WithIn, you are also a new listener to WithIn. So we're going to do this together, one day at a time, one episode at a time. So thanks for your patience with me. I want to get better at this. Okay, so let's talk about why a podcast. If you do or don't know me, I have been blogging for a few years. I was a chef. You may not have known that, but I was a chef before having kids. And I never planned on staying home and being a mom to 4 young kids. And yet it's kind of where life took me. And since I made a minimum wage, we couldn't really afford childcare for me to go work in a kitchen. And it just didn't align with, raising 4 young kids. And I think the chef world has changed a little bit now, but it's tough for women. It's really, really tough. So I ended up staying home with the kids, and John Paul decided, he was going to pursue his career and I would be the stay-at-home parent. It wasn't really necessarily something we talked about ahead of time. It's just sort of the way it happened. And once I was home with the kids, once I had my 4th baby, I did not do great at home with kids. I was probably meant to have 1 child, not 2 or 3 or 4. But, that's what God gave us, thankfully, because I love all of my kids. Don't get it twisted. And it's hard. It's really hard. If you were a stay-at-home mom, you get it. And I thought staying at home with one was really hard. And by the fourth, I had hit a wall. So I started blogging and I started sharing things on about food and like old recipes and just I got into food photography and it was a creative outlet for me. And at the time, which I'll get into a little bit later about why I got into mindfulness and meditation, but I was starting to share a little bit about like my morning meditation routine as like the babies were like crawling around. I'm like, here's me drinking lemon water. Here's me meditating on a bolster with a baby, in my arms. And I was starting to share a little bit more about my meditation and mindfulness practice. And then that grew a little bit. And I started this blog called Grace in the Crumbs. I don't know if any of you have been with me for that long, but it was originally called Grace in the Crumbs, finding grace in all the crumbs of life. And, I've been doing that for a while, sharing, and it changed. And then I started sharing about meditation and it changed. But I realized a few years ago, like Instagram and blogging is a tough place to be. And I felt like I needed a break. Okay, so let's talk about why a podcast. I mean, you could do a lot of things in the world. And like, Katy, why did you start a podcast? I mean, I know that you're not actually asking me that question. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the answer. I have been blogging for quite a few years. I was a food blogger. I don't know if you know that. I went to culinary school and was a chef before I had the kids. Then I was food blogging for a while. And then I started talking about meditation and yada, yada, yada. And here we are years later. The thing is about social media is it kind of sucks. I wish it didn't. It used to be a place for people to share creative, ideas and thoughts, and you'd get into really great conversations. And it was a beautiful place to share imagery and words and thoughts. And I feel like it went from a creative outlet to one really long advertisement that makes you feel shitty about yourself. And that's not fun for me. And I know it's not fun for a lot of you. I go on Instagram and I immediately feel like I'm parenting my children wrong. I need to totally like overhaul my diet, my exercise routine, change supplements, get a new eye cream, and like a whole host of other things. And it just kind of feels yucky. And I have enough messages in my day to day life telling me that I'm not doing enough. I certainly don't need social media to be another one. So, about a year or two ago, I was having this conversation with John Paul, and I'm like, if I'm going to spend time away from the kids, away from you, putting my heart and soul into something, it's got to be something real. And so I had said to him, I really want to do a podcast. I want to have the conversations that I'm not having in my day to day lives because I know other women are wanting the same thing. I know what used to be felt like connection on Instagram no longer feels that way for a lot of people, and we're hungry for it. So for me, going to a podcast, like a place we can tell stories and share, was like a no brainer. On a more personal level, outside of that, um, sorry, I'm going to get emotional here and I don't want to. I mean, I do want to, but just not yet. I knew I would cry on this episode. I just didn't think I'd cry at like minute 4. That's okay. Um, I've never really felt like I fit in. I'm 45 years old and I've never had this like big group of women that I feel like I see so many other women have. I grew up in the era of like the Sex and the Cities and watching, these 4 girls in New York be like best friends. I always wanted that. And I used to think there was something wrong with me, like, was it just me? Am I too loud? Am I too tall? Am I too outspoken? Am I too opinionated? Like whoever if you might or might not know this, but I'm actually 6'1". So this idea of being too much was both like figurative and literally. It was just too big. And so I would shrink a lot in my world and I would try to get people to like not really notice me and try to fit in and do all the things to make myself mix, be a chameleon with whatever group of women it was, whether it was in Chicago or in college or in high school. And I mean, you know where this story goes. It doesn't end well. It never seems to work. And I think I'm to the point in my life. No, I don't think. I know I'm to the point in my life where I no longer want to be that girl who's worried about fitting in. And I know in my day to day life, whether it's like at school pickup or in our new community, I am not having some of the conversations I want to be having and that I know so many other women are wanting to have. In our day to day world, we do so much of like, oh, I'm great, I'm good. How's Billy at camp? Or, how's, small talk going? Like that's like basically what it is. And I don't do small talk well. which is probably why I don't have a lot of friends. Um, but I do this really well. I do this. This is what I know. This is my comfort zone. I mean, not speaking to people publicly, but having intimate conversations. I just have to pretend no one's listening. No, but for real, this feels like the thing that I've been craving in my own life. And I know so many of you are craving. So I want to talk about the podcast topics for a second. When I originally was wanting to do this podcast, I had told my friend Kelly, who was helping me on this, that I wanted to call it Not Another Wellness Podcast. And so I want to address that for a second. I love content. I love listening to podcasts. I love reading books of different people have written. I've probably read every self-help book out there and listened to every podcast I can get my tiny little fingers on. And the thing is so much of what's out there right now is telling women to do more. And it is telling you to change something about you or to fix something. And, whether it, especially online, but especially wellness podcasts too, health and wellness podcasts will tell you, you should be cold plunging. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. And they have experts on that tell you these beautiful stories around like why you need this air filter, or why X, Y, or Z, or why you should intermittent fast. And I don't want this to be that. You don't need any more information about what you need to be changing in your life. That's out there in tenfolds. There's so much noise telling you to do things outside of yourself. So I just want this to be a reminder that everything that you need is already within you. So these stories and these conversations are not another thing to go do. It's just permission and a chant and like a welcome call and a rally cry to do less. And to recognize that so much of the stuff that we've been sold on what a woman should be, how you should behave, what your home should look like, what your diet should look like, what your body should look like, what your marriage, your parenting, the whole thing, what aging should look like. You don't have to do it. So we are going to rewrite and examine some of these stories and some of the things that are keeping you stuck in shame and in perfectionism and in self-optimization in order for you to start living a more free life. When I say free, you're like, what the fuck does that even mean? It means waking up and not worrying about what the hell you should be doing. And so much of this, of our lives, of like what would feel good for us is already intuitively within us. Like you already know, I already know. And yet we have abandoned our own knowing and instead give our power away to everyone else, whether that's people online, whether that's family, whether that's doctors, whether that's me. JK, you're not giving me your power. But you know what I'm saying. And we don't have to do it anymore. I want to talk to you a little bit about my story and my background. For those of you who don't know, I grew up with a lot of anxiety. I don't know. I was born in the 70s, late 70s. I don't think there was language. I mean, I'm sure there was language. I just didn't know it, that's what it was, what that pit in my stomach was. But it was always this feeling of chasing something, like I was going to be late for school, or not going to get the right grade, or not going to go to the right college, the whole thing. I grew up always chasing things, becoming someone other than myself, or let's just say this, becoming a better version of myself from a really young age. I have an amazing, amazing family, really supportive still to this day. And I don't know if it was really anything that they necessarily did, or if it was just society, if it was just culture, or if it's just what being a woman is, a combination of all of the above. But there was an innate knowing in me that I needed to change who I was, that I was, again, too big, too this, too X, Y, or Z. And so I did all of the things. I got the straight A's. I was the student council president. I went to a good college. And then I met my husband, and he was going to laugh when he listens to this. But my husband, my partner, who many of you have heard of me speak of before, John Paul, great guy, really good guy, super sweet guy. He actually hates it when I say he's a good guy. He's like, I have a lot of other things besides just a good guy, but he is. Sorry, JP, you just are a good guy. But he seemed like the good guy, so I was like, that's the guy you marry. You marry the good boy, you have babies, you do the stay-at-home wife thing. And so I did all the things. I checked all the boxes. And as I had mentioned earlier, I was a chef, and I decided to stay at home with the kids. And one child turned into two and turned into three. And then we got pregnant with our fourth, and Frankie, our fourth baby, was an unexpected pregnancy. He knows this. He was the best surprise. And he completed our family. And in many ways, I can't imagine our life without him being in our life. And at that time, though, in my early 30s, when I was a young mother to three kids, having a fourth baby that was unexpected really threw me for a curveball. And it threw me for a curveball because we were also simultaneously moving from the Midwest out to the East Coast. And so I moved pregnant, and we got to the East Coast, and we were living in Mamaroneck, New York. I don't know if many of you are familiar with Mamaroneck. It's in Westchester. JP was working in Manhattan, and I was at home with the kids in Westchester. And I had this fourth baby. So all of my kids were really young, 6 and under, 4 little kids. And my husband, my partner, was never around. And we had no family, and no, we couldn't afford help. And I was like, I got this. And I might have shared earlier that I'm not really built to be a stay-at-home mom. I was never really built to have 4 children. My anxiety went into overdrive. There was a huge part of me that still felt like I needed to perfect motherhood. So just like I got the straight A's and I went to the good college, I was going to do the same thing with motherhood. I was going to have the big birthday parties. I was going to have the organized house. I was going to make all the baby food. Asher and Lillian, I did cloth diapers for. I was going to nurse them. Like, I was going to do it all. And it worked a little bit with when I had 1 or 2 kids. You could kind of get away with it. And by 3, the cracks started showing. And by 4, the cracks really started showing. And I couldn't keep it all together. I couldn't do all of the organic baby food and the cloth diapers and the gentle bleeding, weaning or whatever it was. And it all hit me. And at that time, I was still drinking. You may or may not know that I'm sober now, that I was drinking, and I wasn't committed to a meditation practice. So I didn't have those tools. And I didn't have the marriage then that I have now. So there was no such thing as equitable parenting. It was me. And JP was, he was making money and I was taking care of the kids. It's just how it was. It was sort of unspoken between the two of us. And it was really lonely. It was hard. It was really hard, which sounds crazy to just say that taking care of 4 kids was that hard, but it really was. And I think it was so hard because I just wanted to do it so well. I wanted to be really good at it. I wanted to be a really good mom. I wanted to be a really good wife. I still do. But the pressure and the expectations to do it all without letting any of the cracks show, because 10 years ago, we weren't letting the cracks show. Women were holding it all together. The women were being perfect. My husband did not change diapers. We did not have help. I wasn't working, so why would I have had help? When our family would come, I'd still make the Christmas dinners and the Christmas cookies, and I still wrapped all the presents perfectly, and I was still doing the birthday parties. I was still doing it all. I was just juggling all the plates. I was really good at it. And that's the hard part about being so good at those things, because you can keep going for a while. So I kept going. I kept going as hard as I could. I was pushing that train forward. And I did not let any of the cracks show. My anxiety would be eating me up on the inside and on the outside. Picture fucking perfect. I managed our home to a T. The Christmas cards always went out on time. The home cooked organic meals. And I was losing it. I say this all the time. If you know me, that I got really good at being perfect and really shitty at being happy. I didn't know that you were allowed to be a different way. I just didn't know. The idea of letting myself off the hook felt like I would have failed. I was a failure. And I also think that there was a part about not working and not having a career that I felt like I had something to prove with motherhood. That because I wasn't bringing in an income, because I had left not just a career previously in advertising, I was in advertising before I was a chef. So I had left not just one, but two careers. I had set aside a college education. I was not working. I was bringing in no income. This was my job. And how could I not be good at it? That thought of Katy being a failure at something was not an option. So the stress and the anxiety of, trying to be perfect when you're human will eat you alive. And the combination of not sleeping because I have a newborn and JP being gone all the time, us fighting in our marriage, and the combination of drinking probably a little more than I should, and eating crappy, drove me to a point where one winter evening, Frankie was a couple months old, but I was alone home and it was a snowstorm in Connecticut or in Mamaroneck, I'm sorry. We lived in both. That's why I confused the two. We've lived lots of places. Not anymore. It was this snowy, cold evening, and the kids were being kids. That's it. They were being kids. But I was cleaning up the kitchen from dinner, and there were crumbs everywhere on the floor. And I've told this story a million and one times. I don't know why it gets to me because it's so benign. It's so ordinary. It's so everyday that I think it still gets to me because I still have these moments where I feel like it could happen again. But I was wiping up the crumbs on this floor, and the kids were like crying. And I don't remember who was crying or who needed what, but it was all the four of the kids in this kitchen, and they were on the ground, and our house was a mess. And I'm pretty sure there was a bottle of wine open on the counter. Like you can picture the whole thing. And it's like 5:30, and I know JP's not walking in the door from Manhattan until like 8:45. So, it's that witching hour. And it just felt like too much. And I just started crying, and I ended up just sobbing on the kitchen floor. And I had what I now know was a nervous breakdown, but I didn't know at the time. And I can vividly remember like the kids all walking around me and crying and trying to like get me to pick them up. And I was paralyzed. I just felt numb. Like that out of body experience where you're witnessing yourself, but you can't access it. So I was there, but not there. And I remember seeing myself on that floor and being like, what in the hell happened to you? Who are you? What's wrong with you? Like, get your shit together. And that's what I was telling myself. It wasn't this compassionate, like, oh, of course, this makes sense that you feel this way. It was a get your shit together, Katy, kind of a feeling. And I remember picking myself up off the floor, and the night went on. And I remember thinking to myself, if I don't change something, this is going to kill me. And I know that sounds dramatic, but in many ways, it was very much true. And when I say this, I mean the stress, I mean the overwhelm, I mean the perfecting, I mean the pushing myself as hard as I could in every direction to lose the baby weight, to be a certain way, to keep my image, to keep the house together, to be the good wife, to be sexy in bed, and also to nurse a newborn and take care of three other toddlers. There was no way I could do it all. And I knew I had to find another way to live, but I didn't know how. I didn't know where to begin, but I gave it another try. So that night after I had that nervous breakdown on the kitchen floor and I swore I was going to become a different person, I had no idea where to begin. I mean, where does one begin when they're overwhelmed with four young kids and no tools at their disposal? It's not like we had extra money or extra resources or extra help, but I knew something had to change. And I know for so many of you, especially if you are mothers and especially if you have young children, you may find yourself in a similar season of wanting to do things differently and not knowing where to begin. I think that is such a common place to be. In many ways, I still feel like I find myself in that same spot of wanting to become a different version of myself and not knowing how to start. And for me, a decade ago, it began with meditation. And I had been a yoga teacher. I became a yoga teacher after Sloan was born. So that's my number three. And so I had become familiar. Actually, it was after Lillian was born. I did 2 different rounds of yoga teacher training. So so it was after Lillian was born. It goes Asher, Lillian, Sloan, and Frankie, for those of you who don't know. There will be a test later. So I had been introduced into meditation, but I was not practicing it in my day to day life. And it sort of ebbed and flowed into my life, kind of similar to how my sobriety story went, which we will save for another day. But it's one of those things like I knew it could help me, and yet I wasn't ready. I just didn't want to do it. I was like, no, thank you. No, thank you. But I knew enough to know that I needed something. And so I started there really small. And I started recommitting to becoming a student of yoga again. Instead of teaching, I just became a student and I was going to as many yoga classes as I could and meditating here or there. And I slowly put back the wine glass and stopped drinking quite as much. And I started having conversations with John Paul about needing to make changes in our marriage. I will save that story for another day, but all to say that has been an ongoing process too of finding a way that we can be partners for each other that works because what we had the first 7, 8 years of our marriage would not have gotten us to the place that we are now. That was going to break for sure. And in many ways it did. And I'm grateful that it did. And that night on that kitchen floor, part of my marriage was left there too of like, I need to do things differently. This isn't going to work. So we started having conversations about changing the dynamics in our home. And I started taking care of myself differently. I started putting myself to bed earlier and slowly, these little shifts, these tiny little micro changes began snowballing. And over the course of the decade would, unbeknownst to me, become the foundation that is my meditation and mindfulness practice and sort of just the way I live my life. It was what pushed me in the right way into sobriety, or pulled me, I guess you could say, into sobriety. And it's what led me into teaching meditation and running online meditation programs. And then what ultimately was the push for us to move to California. So it would have been sort of like what I would have considered like the height of what I thought was like running as far as I could from that girl on the kitchen floor. So she had that nervous breakdown. And there was that girl on that kitchen floor that in my mind I left behind that day. And then you get to me, fast forward almost a decade later, and we were leaving Chicago. And I remember when we decided to move to California, I'd always loved the West Coast. It always resonated with me. It's just like an easy way of life in my mind. I pictured it. And it's where I pictured raising the kids. And so sort of on a whim, even though I like the back of my mind it lived there, I never actually thought it would be something we would do. On a whim, we decided to put our house up for sale just to see what would happen. Just like a little, let's just see what happens. And 2 months later, we found ourselves in a rental we had never seen. We sight unseen, found it online and moved in fully furnished and put the kids on a plane and moved them, across the country to California. But at that time, that was me being the farthest version of myself from the girl on the kitchen floor. I wanted to get as far away from her. The girl in New York to the girl in LA. Like I had left her physically. I had left any remnants of that life behind. I was no longer her. I didn't do the same things. I didn't see myself the same way. My marriage was different. Everything was different. And yet, they always say, wherever you go, there you are. And it turns out they weren't fucking around. It's true. Wherever you go, there you are. There you are. So I found myself in California, leading meditation, sober, having this marriage that I thought was like, we were living the dream. And we got out here and I found myself once again, not on the same kitchen floor, but basically having a very similar moment. Only this time my kids weren't babies and I didn't have excuses anymore. But I was still me. I was still that same girl on the kitchen floor in Mamaroneck 10 years earlier who couldn't pick herself up. And it scared the shit out of me because I was doing all the things. And for God's sakes, I was teaching meditation. How could how is this happening again? How am I right back there? How am I that girl again? And I think I was that girl again because you can't ever really change who you are. You can evolve and grow, but I was still me. And that was really scary. I don't think that it was conscious, but as I look back at all of my exploration into everything health and wellness, whether that be food, whether that be mindfulness, whether that be like sobriety, I think in many ways I was using wellness to fix my brokenness. I was using wellness to fix my brokenness. It was just more socially acceptable. But I was still that same girl on the kitchen floor. This time it just wasn't screaming at her kids or drinking too much wine. It was stressing over how to teach meditation and getting 10,000 steps in. So it just looked different. Just two different sides of the same coin. The pendulum had just swung too far the other way. But at the end of the day, I was still trying to become someone I wasn't. And I think this happens a lot in the health and wellness space or in the mindfulness space of us trying to become a better version, if you will, of ourselves, to become someone else instead of to just be who we damn are. But we've been told not to be who we are. And it's what everyone's doing. It's what we see all around us. I see it every single day when I open my phone and I open Instagram. Become someone different, become someone shiny and better and more beautiful. Become someone more mindful, more aware, yada, yada, yada. Same old, same old. I had just believed it and I had fallen into that trap. And it has taken me a hot minute or two to come out of it. When we moved out to California, I stopped teaching meditation because I had sort of hit this similar feeling, the same wall. And I started having that realization of, oh, shit, I'm doing the same things. So I stopped teaching meditation. I put a lot of projects on hold and I sort of went back into my cocoon. I'm just trying to figure out what is it that's so uncomfortable? What is it that's so uncomfortable to just be me? And I've spent the past 2 years learning how to get back into myself, to not have this urge to run, to chase when things feel uncomfortable, to fix, to make things shiny and new, and to welcome in all parts of myself. I want to share a story with you now that I think encompasses what we're talking about so beautifully. A few years ago, I was at a Joe Dispenza retreat. If you ever have the chance to go to a Joe Dispenza retreat, you must go. He is a phenomenal presenter, and I'm a huge fan of his work. So I was at one of his week-long retreats, and I went knowing no one, as I always do, because we've already established I have no friends. So I went by myself. I've gotten very used to going places by myself now. I actually like it. I really like traveling alone. I digress. I was at this meditation retreat, and his retreats are massive. You can picture them, thousands of people in huge like auditoriums or like conference centers. And so then these big grand ballrooms, and people like swarm into these rooms, and you can bring stuff. So you could bring like a meditation bolster or a blanket and pillows. And you can, I just say you can picture it. So instead of bringing like one or two, when people are bringing like sleeping bags, like they're basically setting up tents, but not tents. And so it's always like this rush when the doors open to get a spot. And knowing me and how I don't like crowds and people, I am like the last person to enter the ballroom. So if it starts, the doors open at like, let's say 5 a.m. and the session start at 6, I will show up at 5:59 and just take the worst seat in the house because I just don't like dealing with, the swarm of people. So anyway, this is totally my fault when I show up and there's no spots left, like to be expected, 100% my own fault. And I think this is day 2. And I'm starting to understand that a lot of people will take chairs from the center of the auditorium and sort of pull them to the periphery, the side. We'll just call it the side of the room. And I found a spot. I was like looking all around, and I found this spot with this older gentleman sitting, and he had just like a blanket and a couple pillows, but there was definitely plenty of space next to him between him and this other chair. And I was like, perfect. I'm just going to scooch right in there. And I have nothing with me. I don't even have a meditation bolster. I just have like a little yoga mat. And so I like crouch down next to him, and in my soft, sweet Midwest voice, I say to him, "Hi, I'm so sorry to bother you. Would you mind if I just roll my mat out right here? I'll be real quiet. I won't take up any of your space." Like I say it super like girly and soft and quiet. And he looks at me, and you guys, I shit you not, dead straight in the eyes. And he said, "Actually, I do mind." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he turns around and then just closes his eyes as if he's already in a meditation. And you guys, there was like music blaring, people dancing. Like he was not in a meditation. He was just being mean. I'm just okay. I've had people be mean to me before. Like I'm a big girl. So I was like, oh, whatever. And the person next to him was like, "Here, I'll scooch over a little bit." And I was like, "Thank you so much. I appreciate it." And I rolled on my mat. And first of all, I was just super annoyed with myself that I said it in such a passive way. Like, "Excuse me, would you mind?" I don't know why I even asked him for permission. There was a spot. Of course, I could sit next to him. I mean, someone was going to sit there. So anyway, long story short, we get into the meditation, into the lecture, and I'm sitting there next to this older gentleman. We'll just call him Greg. I'm sitting next to Greg, and Joe starts lecturing. He starts talking about having compassion, and how if we don't have compassion for ourselves, we can't have compassion for other people, and what we don't allow within ourselves, we won't allow with other people. So if we're really hard on ourselves, we'll be really hard on other people. You can picture it. And he starts talking about some other things, but that was really the gist of the opening remarks. And as Joe does in all of his retreats, he encourage you to talk to the person next to you. So he says, "Why don't you go ahead and discuss this with your partner?" I'm like, oh shit. And so Greg, my friend who hates me, looks over at me, and you guys, he has like big tears in his eyes, and he looks at me and he says, "I am so sorry. I owe you the biggest apology. That's not who I am." And I'm getting emotional just saying it because I could viscerally feel the remorse in his voice as he spoke to me. And it wasn't the apology that mattered to me. What hit me were the words, "That's not who I am." And I looked at him and I said to him, "You do not owe me an apology. You are human. It's okay. I forgave you." While, as soon as I sat down, I didn't think more of it. And we kind of chuckled and laughed, and then started talking about our stories and where we were from. And the thing is, well, the best part is we end up then sitting next to each other our entire retreat, and we talked every single session. Like we were each other's buddies, and he's one of the nicest people. But the thing that stood out for me out of that whole situation, because it really wasn't even that big of a deal, except the words that he said, that's not who I am. And the thing is it is who he was or is. It is. He was a person who in that moment was impatient and snapped at me inappropriately. And he was a person who offered compassion and remorse and apologized. And there are so many parts of me and then in all of us that we can maneuver through our days and want to say about ourselves, like, that's not who I am. I'm not the girl who yells at my kids. I'm not the woman who drinks too many glasses of wine at night. I'm not the kind of person who X, Y, or Z snaps at someone at the grocery store or cuts someone off in traffic. And yet, we all can be. We can all be the best of ourselves and we can all be the worst of ourselves. And when Greg was telling me more about himself and as he spoke those words, even, I was just like, that's not who I am. I immediately felt this immense amount of compassion for him. And then equally this immense amount of compassion for myself for all of the times I tried to push away or deny a part of myself instead of recognizing and having compassion and understanding for the whole totality of my humanity. The moments I was patient, the moments I was impatient, the moments I chose the healthy foods, the moments I didn't choose the healthy foods, the times I went to yoga versus didn't go to yoga, the times I yelled at my kids versus the times I was patient with my kids, all of me. It's all complex. And as I think about what we're doing here, and I think what happens in the world we're living in, and I especially see it happening in the space of health and wellness or mindfulness or self improvement or whatever we want to call it, of having parts of ourselves be superior than others or better than, instead of seeing the fullness and the wholeness of ourselves in totality. Of being like, yeah, I am that kind of person. And so are you. So are all of us. And when we can have compassion with ourselves and when we can accept all parts of ourselves, we allow the people we're around, the people we share stories with, the people who listen to us on podcasts, me and you, to accept all parts of your humanity too, and have compassion with all parts of yourself. And when we can do that, we can start showing up in the world in a way that is actually real. So it doesn't come across as like, oh, Katy is an X, Y, or Z person. She's always then. She says, fuck that. That is absolutely not true. I 100% yell at my kids. I will think thoughts about people that maybe I shouldn't. I will binge eat like the best of them. I'll do all the things. I am in no way this unhuman person. And the point is allowing myself to have compassion for all of those parts of myself and welcoming them in is, I think, the superpower. And that's the thing that I think is scary for so many people and what feels uncomfortable for so many people. And the more that we can do that, and the more that you can do that in your own life, and I'm talking directly to you, like the more that you can do that in your own life, the more that you can show up and be like, yeah, that's actually who I am. I made a mistake, or I chose something that wasn't the right choice. I said the words that weren't the right words. I reacted before I thought. I did all the things, and it's okay. And it's okay. And it's okay because I'm human. And the person on the receiving end is human. And they will have compassion with you if you have compassion with them. And that is how we change the world. And that is how we create a place where women can feel free to show up exactly as they are and not the version of themselves that they've been told they have to be because a woman looks like X, Y, or Z. Whether we're talking about her physical looks, whether we're talking about how she parents or how she, I don't even fucking know, all of the things. You know what I'm talking about. When we can start allowing ourselves to be actual, real human people with really messy parts and really beautiful parts, and not just say it, but actually allow ourselves to feel it and to be it, because we all talk about it. We all talk about it. It's out there everywhere. Like, oh, yeah, be real, accept yourself. Like, it's like a whole fucking movement. And yet, I'm telling you, I don't actually see it in real life happening. And so, my challenge to myself and to you listening right now is to ask yourself, like, what are the parts of you? What are the moments in your life that if someone were to open the door in your home and see you and see that conversation you had with your child, or to see you with your hair pulled up in a bun and no makeup on, if they were to see you sitting on the couch eating that bowl of popcorn or ice cream, if they were to see you not wanting to put away your dishes and in the sink, or to order the pizza instead of make the dinner, whatever the fucking thing is, if someone were to open the door of your home and see the actual real you, would you be okay with it? And most of the time is we say no. And it scares the shit out of us. And I will tell you, I knew this when I was teaching meditation. And there were moments that I was like, God, I just finished leading a group of 60 women through meditations. But I know that if they saw me in my house right now, if they saw the way I just spoke to my kids because they didn't, I don't know, brush their teeth, whatever, I would be embarrassed. I'd be mortified. And I hate that for us. I hate that we haven't gotten to a place where we could say, yes, come in and see my messy parts. See me in my most vulnerable moments. See me when I feel my most unbeautiful. See me when I want to emotionally eat. See me when I'm fighting with my partner. See me after I just yelled at my children. See me when I want that glass of wine. I don't know what else to do. That version of ourselves, when we are the most scared, when we feel the most vulnerable, the most raw, the most honest about who we really are, that is when we can connect with another person and we can see the humanity in them. And that is what we are fucking missing. So you don't need me to tell you, you should meditate and do X, Y, or Z. You should change your diet, or you should do X, Y, or Z. No one actually gives a shit about that stuff. You can find that all over the internet. Why you are here and why I hope you stay here is because this gives you a place to welcome in all of you, your whole self. The parts you're scared and terrified of, the parts you're embarrassed and shameful of, and the parts that you fucking love and you want to sing to the praises of. May they all be welcome here. And may this be a reminder for you to call them in. Because I know I am, and it scares the shit out of me. I am not great at living so cracked open. It is really hard and scary. And it feels really liberating and free. And I want that for you. I want that for my daughter. I want that for my boys. I know it is possible. And I think there's something really magical and beautiful that can happen when we can really begin to embrace our whole selves. There is a power that I know that I have that I am just learning to tap into. And I know there is a power within you that you haven't even begun to imagine because you've been so separated. You've lived so disconnected, keeping parts of yourself hidden or shameful or like trying to fix and trying to cover. My God, think about all the wasted energy we have spent. All the wasted worry and time covering our wrinkles and our this and making sure our stomach isn't showing in a picture, or like making sure the neighbors don't overhear you fighting. Like, you guys, so much wasted life. on trying not to be the people that we are. And it's gotten us nowhere. So maybe we do it different. And how, you ask? How do we do it different? Jesus Christ, I don't know. I don't know. I am still figuring it out. But in all honesty, as I say that, maybe some of the beauty is in the not knowing of saying, I'm going to figure this out. And we stay aware and we stay conscious and we keep trying. So each week here, I'm going to invite in thought leaders and experts, everyday people like you and me, friends. I do have a couple like friends, I guess, to come share stories, to talk about what it means to be a woman in today's age, to talk about what it means to have sex 20 years in a marriage, what it means when our bodies age and change, to talk about sobriety, to talk about mindful living and what the hell that even means. Like, what does that even mean? I don't know. And I've been meditating for a really long time. And I feel like I'm just starting to maybe look under the hood of like, what is beneath all of this? What does this mean? We'll explore toxic wellness culture because there is a shit ton of it out there. Not blaming or shaming or judging anyone, but just calling light out into things of how maybe some of the things that we are putting on ourselves, some of these extra pressures to self optimize and self perfect, is really just keeping us stuck in the same vicious cycle that we are proclaiming we're trying to get out of. And we'll talk about motherhood, raising teens, teen daughters. How cool are they, right? Oh, those girls get a bad rap, but they're the best. We'll talk about what it's like to raise teens. We'll talk about what it means to be a woman in today's day and age, careers, has creative aspirations, putting yourself out on the line, marriage, and anything else that you want to talk about. You got something you want to talk about, just let me know. Shoot me an email. No, but like for real, you can shoot me an email. But I know without a shadow of the doubt, I need something different in my life. And I think you do too. And I am really excited about where this is going to go. And I cannot wait to start these conversations. I can't wait to have some of you join in on the conversations and just see where this goes. Because I think that you want to reimagine a way of living that feels really free too. I think we're kind of done with some of this old stuff. Like, haven't we done this perfectionism thing for a really long time? I feel like we could be done with it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. I don't even know how long this episode is, but if you're still listening, thank you for being here. I promise I'm going to try to be cognizant of your time and your energy. So if you're coming here, I want to give you things that feel worthwhile. And I promise I'm going to get better at this faster, not cry so much. And just thank you for all of it. I'm so excited. I hope you are too. All right. I'm going to go make myself some lunch. I'm Katy. This is WithIn. And I'm super excited to get started. I'll see you next week.